Good morning, everybody. The webinar will begin in just a couple minutes. While waiting, I do encourage you to download the handout available under the Handouts tab in the control panel. It summarizes today's presentation. While we wait for it to begin, we do have Deborah Easton online with us. Good morning, Deb. With many organizations shifting to remote work teams, what are some of the challenges of holding employees accountable?
Well, the first challenge I find is when managers are accustomed to FaceTime management, that they feel they can't manage if they don't actually see what people are doing. And that's a shift that needs to happen over to managing by objectives, trusting that once you have set the goal, people will meet that goal and meet that goal by the deadline and with the quality that you're looking for. And there are several software programs out there that help you track the manage by objectives. There are also some programs that allow the team to track it together on the same form so that everybody is certain that everybody else is pulling their own weight and they can see that other people are working and they're not the only one that's feeling overwhelmed by trying to work and manage kids and dogs and everything else that's going on inside of the household at the same time.
Good. Okay, well, we are right at time. So good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Coaching Accountability for Impact on People and Results. My name is Patrick Allen. I'm the Program Manager for Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development's Public Open Enrollment Programs. Our center specializes in providing employee development for partnering organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the world. We offer training as both public open enrollment programs, currently being delivered both live and virtually via Zoom, and also some programs in person and independence. We can also customize any program and deliver it to you live and virtually or in person at your location. I am joined today by Kent State facilitator Deborah Easton. I will be serving as your host, and Deb will be our presenter for today. Deborah has been a communications coach for 30 years and provides audiences with practical and effective advice for communicating with colleagues, customers, and direct reports. Her techniques for one-to-one interactions and group communications provide participants with practical strategies for handling difficult exchanges. She has partnered with Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development to provide a broad range of communication skill programs for organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the world. Her most requested training topics include interpersonal communication skills, leading the multi-generational team, dealing with difficult behaviors, and today's topic, coaching accountability for impact on people and results. Prior to her work in facilitating professional development programs with adults, she taught communication skills in Kent State's Department of Communication Studies, where she supervised 40 instructors of Speech Fundamentals program. She also taught in Kent State's Graduate School of Management and holds a master's degree in speech communication from Kent State University. Everyone in attendance today has been muted to avoid background noise from any of the nearly 100 registered participants. Today's webinar will be very interactive, and Deb will be asking for your responses to her questions. We encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions in writing using the Questions tab on the control panel. I will present your questions to Deborah as time permits throughout the webinar. Again, there is a handout available that summarizes today's presentation, and it's located under the Handouts tab on the control panel. We encourage you to download it and take notes on today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email early next week with a link to view the recording. And now I'd like to introduce Deborah Easton.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome to a tough subject, but I assume you already know that, or you probably wouldn't have signed on for the webinar. Accountability is a tough subject because society as a whole seems to be struggling with the subject of accountability. It seems like ever since there was that incident in the news of the woman who went through McDonald's drive-thru, ordered a hot cup of whatever kind of liquid, put it between her knees, took the lid off, drove away, was burned by the liquid, and sued McDonald's, we've been talking about accountability. Some of you may not remember that. That happened quite a while ago, but we've had a number of interesting examples in the news since then. But accountability itself, the topic is really quite involved. So in our time today, I'd like to just hit some key highlights that I hope will be very helpful to you in meeting some of the challenges that you have. I appreciate those of you who, when you signed up, sent some questions. I've made sure to incorporate answers to those questions in our time together. But so that I have an idea about what many of you are facing, we'd like to offer a couple of polling questions. So at this point, I'm going to ask Patrick, if you would please, put up the first polling question for people. Okay, so the first polling question is, how would you assess the accountability level in your organization? And you'll notice you have three options. A high level of accountability, everyone does their part. Most people are accountable, a few people are inconsistent, or too often we allow excuses for not meeting expectations. So if you would please make your selection and press submit, and then we'll see what those results are.
Okay, it looks like we have a majority of the people voting, so we'll just give a couple more seconds.
Okay.
Then I will close it and let you know the response.
All right, great.
Okay, so it looks at like 65% say most people are accountable and a few people are inconsistent. 33%, too often we allow excuses for not meeting expectations. And at 3%, a high level of accountability and everyone does their part.
Okay. Well, that's kind of a scary result right there. But I'm not surprised with the most people are accountable, but we have a few that seem to hold back. And those few may not necessarily be our direct reports. Sometimes they're colleagues. Sometimes it's the vendor we're trying to hold accountable, or upper management themselves. So it's important to remember that when we're talking about coaching accountability, we're not just talking about holding a performance review over people's heads and the carrot and the stick old theory. We're talking about methods that influence others to do what needs to be done and to actually want to do them. So that's our first polling question. Now, Patrick, if you wouldn't mind putting up the second polling question, that will help me a little bit understand what people are also facing. So we have this second polling question, which is, what is your greatest accountability challenge? Either getting people to come to work, getting them to perform once they get there, improving attitudes, convincing people to enhance their performance, or coaching people to be consistent in their performance. So I'll give you a moment to think through those and submit your response.
Okay, votes are still coming in, so I'll leave it open for just a few more seconds.
Okay. This one takes a little bit more thought, I think.
Okay. Okay, at 30%, improving attitudes. So 38%, coaching people to be consistent in their performance. 25%, convincing people to enhance their performance. 5%, getting people to perform once they get here. And 3%, getting people to come to work.
Okay, well, I'm glad to see that the first one isn't the highest number, because I oftentimes have people who say, they're really having a hard time just getting people to show up these days. So I'm glad that one didn't end up the highest. I'm not surprised that consistency, though, is one of the keys. One of the problems I think we have with consistency is that we're hoping that there will be a magic transformation after one coaching conversation. And oftentimes that's not the case. And so coaching accountability requires consistency on our part in constantly influencing people to maintain that level of consistency. I'm also not surprised that the second highest item on that list had to do with the coaching of attitudes. You'll notice that the title of our webinar is Coaching Accountability for Impact on People and Results. You know, the results side of accountability, we usually have some sort of matrix or some sort of numbers for that. We know how many times they were here. We know the level of productivity, the level of quality. But sitting down and coaching somebody about how they communicate with other people, how their attitudes are communicated through their behavior, those are tougher kinds of conversations. So we will address that a bit in our time together during this webinar. So I'm not surprised to see that that was part of the issue. So now let's take a look at what we mean by accountability itself. All right, so when we talk about guidelines for accountability, the first thing we actually need to do is define accountability. Think about if you were to go back and say to people, okay, we're going to start holding everyone more accountable. Think of what their reactions might be. Patrick, I'm going to ask you, if you were told by upper management, we're going to start holding people accountable, what would your first thought be?
Probably be like, oh no, I think I'm in trouble.
Okay, all right. This is very common that people think it's going to mean they're going to be blamed for mistakes they didn't make. There's going to be punishment of some sort. It's going to be more work. And so part of the difficulty of coaching accountability is the word itself. People have this negative view of what that means. So your first step in coaching accountability effectively is making sure that everybody understands what accountability is. So let's just try a little exercise here to illustrate what we mean by accountability. What I'd like you to do is to stop and think about something at work that constantly frustrates you, okay? Stop and think about something that constantly frustrates you. All right, now, you have that story in your head? Okay, here's what I'd like you to do now. Tell yourself that same story, only this time, tell it from the point of view of how you are contributing to that same problem. Little different focus, isn't it? Okay, so the difficulty that we have there is that when we're looking at accountability, it isn't about punishment. It isn't about more work. It isn't, creating worry in people. When we look at actually these two stories that we just told ourselves, there's a difference between the two. So what was the difference in the two stories? Patrick, I'm going to ask you,
Okay.
What was the difference?
It seemed like in the first version that everything was out of my control.
Okay, and how about the second version of the story?
I guess I focused more on how I could make the situation better.
Okay, and see, this is what we want people to be able to do. This is our definition of accountability, going from I'm stuck in analysis paralysis, I'm stuck in feeling like everything's happening to me, and actually doing something. We are defining accountability as action. Notice story number one, everything is happening to us. We're focused on blaming other people. If the other department would give me information in a timely fashion, I wouldn't have a hard time getting done what I need to get done. Or we're scorekeeping. Well, the night shift doesn't have to work nearly as hard as the day shift does. And once people get focused on that, they're not focused on what they could be doing to make their own circumstances better. They also have a tendency to view the past. It was so much better around here pre-pandemic. Well, A lot of us can say that for so many reasons. But the key is, here we are today. What are we going to do about today? Because staying focused in the problem, which is what was part of the first version of the story, isn't getting us anywhere. So what we want is to get people focused on the second version of our story. We're controlling what we can. The focus is on even coping mechanisms. There are things we can't control. I don't know where all of you are today, although I think there are a couple of people from Arizona who probably didn't experience the same ice storm that we did this morning. Now, that's something that we cannot control, the weather. But how did we cope with that? Right? Coping mechanisms are part of everyone's accountability. Allowing people to stand around the water cooler, the proverbial water cooler, and constantly complain about things is not accountability. Trying to find coping mechanisms for the stress that we all feel is what's critical. We want people focused on action, because action is the solution. And maybe the solution isn't perfect. Maybe the solution won't fix everything, but it'll fix what we can control today. And I know that this seems different perhaps than what you expected in terms of defining accountability. But once you get people into this mindset, you change your meetings. You know, the average problem-solving meeting that goes an hour, 45 minutes of it is spent in the first version of the story talking about the problem. 15 minutes is spent quickly brainstorming some solutions, throwing them up on flip chart sheets, and still people walk out of the room not knowing who's doing what. We need to fix that. 15 minutes in the first version of the story, get it off your chest. Now we spend 45 minutes talking about what can we do, what can we control, and who's going to do what. That's how we shift our team. That's how we shift our organizations from what's oftentimes referred to as a psychological victim mindset to an accountability mindset. We are going to make that difference. So here are some definitions that you want to put forth with your team before you even have the coaching conversation. The first one is, as I've just said, define accountability as action. That's absolutely critical, that it's action. And we need to even think about, are we going to celebrate if somebody tries something and it doesn't work? Oftentimes people are so afraid of being blamed and being condemned for what they tried that they won't try. So are you willing to celebrate failure? Interesting thought, right? Right, focus on what can be controlled, plan for how to cope with anything that cannot be controlled. And here's a key: require solutions to accompany the mention of any problems. This is something that one of my first managers in my career required of me, and I have never forgotten it, because every time we had a conversation, I went in with 2 or 3 solutions. Usually we combined them together, and I always walked out of there feeling positive, feeling powerful, feeling like a contributor, instead of walking in there and asking a parent to fix it for me, hypothetically speaking. So requiring solutions, and then establishing that whoever is affected by a problem must have impact on the solutions. For those of you who felt like you're dealing with a lot of excuses in your organization, this is a very critical guideline to establish with people. When they come in and they tell me about a problem, and they'll say, well, you're going to have to fix it. You're in management. You make the big bucks. You're going to have to fix it for me now. Yes, but you just told me how you are affected by this problem. Therefore, the solution should really come from you, because I may not see all the ramifications of a solution that I come up with and why it might not work. I want people to understand that they are affected by a problem. They must have impact on the solution. A customer calls me by mistake, and the person they really need to talk to isn't in today. Well, I can't just say, I'm sorry they're not here, call back tomorrow. I'm affected by the problem. Therefore, I need to do as much as I possibly can to impact that solution. Basically, what we're trying to do here is change their story, that first version, from a melodrama to an action film. Hopefully, that's making some sense, right? Getting them thinking about what can they do. And that way we don't need to accept the excuses of, oh, it's not within my job description. Yeah, it really is, because we just set that as a guideline, as an organization, as a team, within our department. That is something that we are accountable for. So if you are coaching a direct report and it comes time for performance appraisal time, any of those categories that talk about initiative or teamwork or even the general category of communication, this is affected by that. You keep track of when people have brought problems to you and when they have brought solutions to you, and people who are not doing this are not meeting expectations of their job at this point. Okay. All right. Now, what else do we need to do in defining accountability? Well, oftentimes people ask me the question, how do I change the story in the middle of the conversation when they are really stuck in the problem, in the melodrama? Okay. So technique number 1 here is to use a 3-step technique for action planning. First step is acknowledge the frustration. People will not stop talking about the problem unless they have had a moment where they felt they were acknowledged, that somebody heard them. Sometimes, you know how it is, your most accountable people, oftentimes they're the ones who will knock on your door and say, I don't need you to solve this. I just need 5 minutes to vent. Okay, now that I vented, I feel better. I know what to do. Thank you. And they walk away. That's what we want all of our people to be able to do. But sometimes we just have to be the listener. Instead of jumping right in and giving the solution, acknowledge their frustration. Then we start asking questions like, all right, what's under our control right now? What can we control? Let's focus on that, because that's going to lead us then to, okay, what can we do right now to make this better? Right? See how this will counteract excuses like, well, upper management's going to take another 2 months to decide this one, so there's nothing we can do about it. No, what are we going to do during that 2 months to make our situation better while we are waiting for that final decision to be made? So by asking these questions, we're basically saying, look, we need to do something, and complaining about it is not the action plan that we're looking for. Okay, so that leads us to technique number 2. Refuse to be stuck in the problem. Okay, instead of accepting excuses like, well, I didn't know, turn it around. Well, now that you do, what ideas do you have? Well, nobody told me. Well, now that you know, what will you do differently? What questions could you ask in the future to ensure that you will be given the information that you actually need? So questioning becomes a very, very important part of your coaching accountability talents. And there are a number of very good books out there about questions. There are books like Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And it's questions to ask ourselves, questions to ask other people, or The 7 Powers of Questions. Just Google books on questions, or go to Amazon and go to their book category on questioning. And there are many good resources on how to use questions to help guide people to their own solutions. You see, what we're doing in coaching accountability is helping them find their power. That's what story number 2 is all about, helping them find their power. All right, so let's look then at an example of how this all plays out. All right. So let's say a direct report says to you, I am so tired of waiting for IT to get here and fix my computer. I can't respond to customers as quickly as I should. Forgive me, those of you out there in IT, but this is unfortunately a common complaint I'm sure you're accustomed to. Okay, so your first response is to acknowledge their frustration. It's frustrating when technology doesn't work. So what has been your workaround up to this point? In other words, I'm asking about what actions have you been taking? I'm starting that conversation about action. After they answer that, then we're going to give some explanation of why, what's going on. You know, IT is currently overwhelmed implementing this new system. What else can we do since the customer is affected by this issue? Right? Since the usual way we'd like to handle it isn't there, now it's time to talk about thinking outside the box. Okay, how do we cope with this? And that may be an outside of the box kind of idea. If they're still stuck, they'll say, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. Right? No, that's not acceptable. This is the point where we're saying, hey, is there really nothing else we can do? You know, how about your coping mechanisms? How are you coping with this situation? Is how you express your stress over this causing more stress for yourself or others? I mean, I could see in this situation, if they're frustrated, they're communicating that to the customer. Do we want the customer to think that our computer systems aren't functional? Because now they're going to start wondering, well, what else is wrong with their system over there? I mean, is the product dysfunctional as well? We certainly don't want anybody thinking that. So this is how we would handle some of these kinds of conversations where people just seem to be so overwhelmed, can't think their way out of the problem, and they're asking us to fix it for them. Okay. So let me ask you at this point, what questions or examples do you have that you would like to talk through? And I'll give you a moment to type those in.
Okay, Deb, while we're waiting for others to come in, we have had a few questions come in already.
Okay.
How do I handle legitimate complaints like we are understaffed or they are fatigued by COVID?
Okay. All right. This is part of the difficulty of coaching accountability is when you hear the same thing over and over again, it's too easy to just lump that into the excuse category and not realize that, you know, legitimately there are situations that people are COVID weary. There's no doubt about that. People are feeling understaffed because some people retired as a result of COVID or chose not to come back to that particular organization, and people are really struggling with some of these issues. But the more you hear them, the more they begin to sound like an excuse. So that step number one of acknowledging their frustration is very important, and how you do that is also important. Apologizing for things that are not your fault is not something you want to do. Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. You know, some people that are really, really overwhelmed, or some of your chronically negative people, many of you can envision that maybe you deal with an Eeyore. You remember Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. Oh, nothing around here is as good as it was 10 years ago. Nobody ever listens to me. I'm the welcome wagon for new employees. I tell them every negative thing there is about the company. You know, if you have one of those and you say, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way, they hear your agreement. So you need to be careful of to whom you say, yeah, I understand. I'm feeling that same way. For some people, that creates that camaraderie that you're looking for and that empathy. For others, they will take that as my supervisor agrees. So therefore, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to complain about it, so we don't have to do anything about it. That's not what I want to have happen. So when it is a legitimate situation, it's still the same process, but we might take a little bit longer acknowledging. Okay, so tell me how you're feeling overwhelmed. today, because I know this has been going on for a while. What's new? What's being added to it that I'm not aware of? Okay, what's your workaround? Is that still functioning for you? What other ideas have you had? Sometimes even asking the question, what's your perfect world here? Right? If you could have it perfect, and they would say, oh, hire more people. Okay, that we're trying. Okay, that's just doesn't seem to be happening quickly. But maybe even asking them, are there questions we should be asking during the interview process that will help people come on board and stay with us instead of just trying out the job and then not showing up again after 2 weeks? So again, same kind of process. Okay, sorry, long answer. Go ahead, Patrick, any other questions here?
Yeah, we've gotten like 3 or 4 new ones that came in, so we'll get to a couple of them now, and then hopefully towards the end we'll have time to go through some more. But first one, how do you deal with managers that complain that they are too busy to coach their direct reports?
Yeah, I have a feeling that might have been an HR person asking the question. Okay, one of the things that we need managers to understand is that their job as a manager is a two-pronged approach. They need to do what it is, all the other tasks that managers do in coordinating the work, etc., but they also are required to manage people. This is why I titled this program Coaching Accountability for Impact on People and Results. Managers more than anybody are accountable for those two factors. So one of the things that oftentimes help is to ask your manager, what kind of people related fires do you find yourself being approached with or having to put out all the time? Okay, the reason that's happening is because we're not coaching people often enough. If there is a person on their team, for example, that upsets everybody all the time because of their behavior, maybe I don't know, they're loud, they use inappropriate humor, and the manager is not stepping in and coaching that, the manager may be saying, oh, these are adults, they should know how to act. Well, you know, I think many of us have witnessed a 52-year-old engage in a tantrum like a 2-year-old. If there's positive reinforcement to that, in other words, ignoring it is positive reinforcement, then that 52-year-old is going to keep having those kinds of tantrums. So how much time is the manager currently spending putting out the fires created by the fact that they're not managing? In other words, they're already putting in the time, but we need them to redirect that time. So this is what I have found to be most helpful when you're trying to convince managers. It needs to be a time study, because that's why they're saying they don't have time to manage people. There's too much managing the work. All right, well, if the work isn't getting done correctly, it's because somehow people aren't being managed. Okay, another question.
What if you have someone that doesn't think there is a problem despite several conversations regarding the issue? Is it time to part ways?
Possibly. And I hate saying that. I really do. Self-awareness is absolutely critical. And this can be a problem in a number of ways. I remember a nursing supervisor telling me that she was having difficulty as healthcare was making changes. She had a nurse who refused to call a doctor, and this isn't a hospital setting, refused to call a doctor in the middle of the night to tell him that the patient's medication needed to be changed because she was having such a bad reaction to the medication. And the nursing supervisor had a conversation next morning, and the nurse said, oh, I've been a nurse for 30 years. You never interrupt a doctor in the middle of the night. And she said, but healthcare has changed. This is what you are expected to do. And she finally had to get to the point where she said, you know, we have talked about this a number of times, and you've said that you are not willing to do this. So I need to ask you a bottom line question. This is what the hospital now requires, that when this situation arises, you will call the physician in the middle of the night and change that prescription. Are you willing to do that? And this nurse who had been around for 30 years said, no, that's not the way I was trained. And the nursing supervisor had absolutely no choice but to say, then you are telling me you are not willing to perform the job the way the hospital is paying you to perform it. Therefore, we need to talk about your exit strategy. So that's an example of when you get to that point where it is a refusal because I don't think I need to, because I never had to, or just overall lack of awareness of their own behavior. I had a situation once where we videotaped a person, how they dealt with customers. It was horrible. I mean, they threw things across the counter, the look on their face, their tone of voice, their word choice, everything. We videotaped it with their permission. We showed the person the videotape. She said, that's not me on the videotape. And that was, you know, kind of out of all of our realm. Something else was going on there. So I think when you get to the point where we have to determine, is it aptitude? They just really don't know how to do this, or they don't have the capacity to perhaps handle the stress of the job. That's aptitude as well. Then we have the wrong body in the wrong position. If it's attitude, they can do it but refuse to do it, we still have the wrong body in the wrong position. And look, that's not a bad thing. I was the wrong body in the wrong position as a high school teacher. People kept telling me I was doing a good job, but I didn't feel it. And when I moved on to something else, then I began to feel it, and I really think I was much more effective. So sometimes we're helping people transform themselves. Okay. What else, Patrick?
Sorry, I was muted there.
Okay.
I think you kind of covered this one.
Okay.
How do I handle the person who complains about things we definitely have no control over?
Okay. Again, that comes back to that question. Okay, what is out of our control? Sometimes it is a greater challenge to function inside the box than it is to think outside the box. And that's a quote from a book called QBQ, Question Behind the Question, a very short read on accountability. And sometimes what we have to do is just sit down with that person and literally draw the box. Say, okay, what's boxing you in right now? And they'll say weather, short staffing, the budget, time. Okay, draw the box. And I'll say, okay, can we change any of the sides of the box? No. Okay, then we need to find a way to succeed inside this box. And we may have to actually have the conversation. Look, when you leave your work area to take a restroom break, at this point, I expect you to go directly from your work area to the restroom, not circulate throughout the floor to get there, spreading all of this negativity about the weather and the budget and the time and the manpower kinds of issues. Okay, this choice of action is not acceptable. And they may say to you, hey, you know, I have freedom of speech. I'm allowed to talk about these things. Yes, but we are required here at the company, as you know, we are required on our team to provide 2 solutions whenever we bring up a problem. And while you are talking about the problem, I'm not hearing those solutions. So therefore, you are not meeting your job requirements. See, I think a lot of times when we think about the impact on people, the interpersonal skills that we're holding people accountable for, we often don't realize that we can set guidelines for that. We can set rules for that. Okay. Okay. All right. Sounds pretty good. All right. Shall we move on to guideline number 2? That work for us, Patrick, with the questions?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Very good. All right. So let's look at guideline number 2. We had guideline number 1, defining accountability and how we utilize that. Here's guideline number 2, ensure that change occurs. And the first part of this is being specific about the expected action. Try saying that 10 times fast. All right. Now, the question we ask ourselves is, how do I see it happening? And this is especially for those of you who said you may be needing to coach some attitude issues. Please remember that attitude is communicated through behavior. You hear it in what they say, the tone of voice they say it, when they say what they say. You see it in how quickly they turn from the problem to the solution. You see it in how productive they are. You see attitude. You see it in attendance. Attitude is communicated through behavior. So how do I see the action happening? Notice the difference I have here. If I say to this person, customers have said that you are rude. Now look what I just did there. First of all, I described the person as a whole. You are a rude person. Sounds like I'm totally writing them off. Okay. Secondly, rudeness, well, that can be communicated in 100 different ways. So if I'm coaching this person about being rude, do they even know what it is they're doing or what they need to change? No, because I'm not being specific about what I am seeing. If, on the other hand, I say throwing papers across the counter for customers to sign does not meet our definition of good customer service. Now, ask yourself, as I said that, or as you read this off your screen, can you see that? If you can see that, then we're being specific enough. You can see it, they can see it, hopefully. That takes self-awareness, obviously. But notice a second example, attitude being communicated in behavior. You need to stop being so negative in meetings. Well, what exactly is communicating that negativity? Instead of saying what you don't think will work, offer 2 ideas that will. Okay? So you see that our coaching process here is, first of all, focusing on the choices that they're making, not who they are and how they are as a person, but the choices that the individual is making. And this addresses a very common question people have, and that is, how do I have this conversation without it being personal? Okay, people get attached to what they do and they take that personally, but it's a lot better to talk about throwing papers across the counter as a choice that can be changed than saying, you as a person are rude and I'm writing you off. Okay, so we're focusing on the choices, and then we're also asking them, what other choice can you make, or offering a different choice ourselves. Okay, all right. I'm assuming, given this is kind of a difficult issue, there might be a question right here.
Yeah, I actually have a few of them.
Okay.
How do I handle the action when it's more of a personality issue?
Okay. Personality does have impact on the way in which we communicate, but it is not the only factor. Habit also contributes to how we communicate. I go back to my example of the 52-year-old who has the 2-year-old tantrum. That has become habit. Why? Because it's been positively reinforced. So when they say, hey, that's just the way I am, that's just the way I talk, people have to get used to me, they're being too sensitive, you talk to them about that. No, I'm sorry. We're saying, I'm not asking you to change your personality, but using profanity in the workplace is not a choice that the company accepts. So, well, I do that all the time. Okay, all the time outside of work is your prerogative. Here on the job, it is not acceptable. And it's the same with anything. Somebody talks about, well, I hear a stupid idea and it's just written all over my face. Okay, so you are aware of that. So here's what I'd like you to do. During meetings, when you're hearing ideas that you disagree with, I want you to have something to drink, and I want you to hold the glass up to your face while you're listening to that idea. You see how it's going to cover up the facial expression? So when we're talking about these personality issues or attitude communicated through behavior, we may need to get a little creative in helping that person know, what's an alternative. It's like when people need to stop smoking. They get in the car, that's their trigger. They want to smoke. They've got to have Tootsie Rolls in there or lollipops or something that gives them an alternative behavior. And this is where you want the conversation to go with this person, okay? Is with what the alternative options could be. Okay, what's another question, Patrick?
How can I see the action when people are remote?
Okay, so remote is going to change some of the mode of communication. First of all, email. People from home don't realize that they're still using their business computer, their company computer, and those emails are still there. And that may be something that if I'm hearing from customers, I keep receiving these rude emails that I may need to review, or I may need to ask the person to CC me on the email so that I can coach them through. And afterwards talk with them, set up a Teams meeting, set up a Zoom meeting, and so we can look at each other, but I can also pull up the slide just like I'm doing here and say, now look, here's this word choice. Okay, I know you, I know what you meant, but here's how the customer took it. So we may have to actually put in some ways of monitoring that behavior. Because they may get the job done, but the way they went about it is what people are objecting to. And so I may have to be a little bit more involved in their methodology. Okay, all right.
The only other question that came in was kind of along the same lines of what you were just talking. Is it okay to use examples of someone's email to show them how they're coming across to others in their word choice and tone?
Yeah, in fact, one of my colleagues who taught email etiquette, that's what she would do in the program, is that she would ask people to submit samples with any kind of confidential information from the company blocked out, but then she would help them by using their own examples of word choice to see how they could be more effective. So remember that anything that is done electronically is company property. So yes. Okay. All right. So in looking at ensuring that the change occurs, make sure that while we're talking about these behaviors, we are connecting it to the job description. This is a little thing, but it has big impact. In other words, please don't say, I need you to do whatever it is you're asking, because that will make it sound like they're doing you a favor. And oftentimes that's where the inconsistency problems come in. Oh, I thought you were just asking me to do that one time. Instead, we word it, the job requires, or you've heard me already say a couple times, the company requires, or the organization requires, right? So be careful of that, because again, that can sound like a favor they won't be consistent with. And you might even want to put the consistency word in there. The job requires that from this point forward, you will consistently, right? Make sure that word consistently is in your written documentations as well. Okay, then technique number 3 here is we need to identify their roadblocks or their enablers. Now, let's look at enabling here for just a moment. It means doing something for someone that they are capable of doing for themselves. Here's a question for all of you out there. Have you ever said to yourself, it'll take me longer to explain it to somebody than it will be to just do it myself? Or do I get so frustrated that I just do it because that would be easier than having the conversation with the person about what they need to do? Are there rescuers on your staff that out of the goodness of their heart do things for people, and now those people are beginning to think that the rescuer needs to, that's part of their job now? Right? We need to identify whatever roadblocks or the enablers, including me, that might be doing for this person what they are capable of doing for themselves. And if they are not capable, we have an aptitude issue. And we may need to see if there are other job duties that they could perform within the organization. We don't always have to just let the person go, but would they be a better fit in another area? And then we have technique number 4, and that is using action triggers. Action triggers are connecting a new behavior to an existing one. Let's say that I want to improve my balance, and I've heard that if twice a day you stand on one foot over time, that will help. So in the morning, I stand on my left foot while I brush my teeth. In the evening, I stand on my right foot while I brush my teeth. That's an action trigger. When you brush your teeth, you will also stand on one foot. See, this makes it possible so that people, instead of just thinking, oh, I have to add this thing to my list, no, they're connecting it to something that's already on the list so that the behavior becomes immediate. Okay. So think about, you have people that come in and the first thing they do is take their coat off, they go get coffee, hang around the break room for a while, then they come back and turn their computer on. No, you come in and as soon as you take your coat off, you turn on the computer. Coat, computer, both of them together. Then we can do coffee. Okay, so we've got 3 C's there in the correct order now. Coat, computer, coffee, right? Those are action triggers. Okay, all right. So what kinds of questions arose from this information, Patrick?
What about the person who just wants to keep doing what they've always done and are happy with their meets expectations ratings?
Well, is this okay as far as the organization is concerned? They are meeting expectations. They are completing tasks that need to be completed. Is that okay? Is it that we want everybody to take on more work? Is it that we want to develop everybody? And what is the reason for that? Or is it okay that we have some people that are happy, I don't know, putting part A together with part B, and they do a good job of it, and we need somebody to do that? So I think that comes down to what's best for the organization. I know many organizations are talking about, improving people and improving our processes, but certain tasks need to be completed. And you have certain people that are happy with that. Maybe that can be okay. That's a tough question. Okay, what else?
How do you coach upwards? Newly assigned a direct report who is managed by the same person for many years, and the old manager is causing problems.
Okay. So this is why we, at the very beginning, talked about accountability having to do with influence. Obviously, we don't have a performance review we can hold over our upper management's head. But remember key strategies with influence. First of all, why is this important and what's in it for this manager to stop doing what they're doing? Okay, right now they're doing what they're doing because somehow they see an advantage to them. And without the specifics, obviously that's difficult for me to know, but what's in it for them to let go? What's in it for them to get out of the way? People have all different kinds of definitions of what helpful looks like. And it's very possible this person just thinks they're helping. It's not anybody else's definition of helpful. So that's your key, is try to figure out, what's in it for them to let go, to stop doing what they're doing, to do something different. That's how we get buy-in from people, is the what's in it for them. Okay. Any other questions at that point?
No, but we are getting close on time, so if you want to just go ahead and finish up.
Okay, all right. So just some quick reminders here. Define accountability as action. Get them focused on the second, solution-focused story. Acknowledge their frustration, ask what's under their control, discuss solutions or coping mechanisms. Be specific about the expected action. What do you see happening? Remember, how can you see it? Attitude is communicated in their behavior. Focus on the choices they're making, not personality, anything else. This is a choice. Please make a different one. Identify the roadblocks and the enablers and use action triggers. So that's a summary of everything that we have talked about here today. Are there any other questions, Patrick, that would people have submitted here? You may be muted. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
My issue is an employee that has repeatedly demonstrated poor behavior, perhaps sabotage attempts on coworkers, hostility towards a coworker. The work is good, and therefore nothing is being done about the behavior, which is destroying the motivation for other workers.
Okay. It is time to discuss this with HR and with upper management. Remind them of the performance evaluation. The performance evaluation has impact on results categories, which by the question, this person is doing well, they're productive. But that performance review also has impact on people categories, whether it's teamwork, integrity, communication, whatever it is, those are impact on people categories. And I see this happen in organizations all the time, where we let a productive person get away with all of this other behavior simply because we only focus on one side of that performance review or one side of my title that I have here. Impact on people and results, they are of equal importance. It's time to talk about how morale is lessening, how you may have actually lost people because people don't want to work with them anymore. Or maybe you even have more requests right now to work from home because people just don't want to be around this individual. It's possible that customers could possibly love this person because they know how to behave around customers, but they're choosing that, oh, I don't have to behave that way around coworkers. It's time to get very definitive that that is a job requirement. This is not a conversation about playing nicely in the sandbox. This is a job requirement. And while they perform the other aspects of the job well, this side of their job performance is failing. And the bonus, the performance review needs to start reflecting that, and everybody needs to be on board with that. As I said, upper management, HR, they need to understand the ramifications of this person's behavior. If for no other reason than it's a hostile work environment and they're opening themselves up to all kinds of problems.
Okay, good. Okay, so that does conclude our time together. We would like to thank you for attending and encourage you to register for Deborah's full program, which will be delivered on Monday and Tuesday. Actually, June 26th or June 6th and 7th, we just added because the April 26th and 27th program has filled. So I encourage you to register for the program as soon as possible. The program will be delivered live virtually through Zoom. You can register at the website you see on your screen, or you can call us at 330-672-3416, or email us at yourtrainingpartner@kent.edu. We can bring all of our programs to your organization virtually or in person and tailor them to fit your organizational needs. You can join our extensive list of clients and bring Kent State to your organization. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar, which will be on Friday, March 18th, when we will be discussing redefining employee engagement and retention with Kent State facilitator Christy Frieden. During this webinar, we will take a fresh look at employee engagement and retention, provide critical information to rethink your HR practices, and discuss what employees are looking for in the new work reality. Registration for this webinar will be opening soon. For those attending live, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please complete this survey so that we can be assured that we are bringing you the most usable and relevant content possible. You will also receive an email early next week with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development and your presenter, Deborah Easton, thank you for attending and have a great weekend.